Hi, welcome to the next episode of the Cyber Insurance News and Information Podcast. I'm your host and the executive editor of Cyber Insurance News, Martin Hinton. Joining me today to discuss all things cyber insurance is Ryan Mimmo. He's the head of underwriting at Converge Insurance, and I'm going to let him tell us a little bit about how he got to that role and a little bit about Converge. So, Ryan, go ahead.
Martin, thanks for having me today. Appreciate it. Yes, and some background about myself. I've been in the insurance industry almost on 20 years now. Started my career back in the claims side at a large traditional carrier. From there, I moved on to the broker side and eventually fell into underwriting cyber-wise about 10 years ago. I've worked at a traditional carrier and also smaller startups, working with wholesale and retail brokers. And I've now found myself here as the head of underwriting at Converge. And Converge, I've been around for 2 years, and we blend traditional underwriting with tech-driven insights.
Tell me a little more about that. Is that AI? We hear a lot about AI, both in the cybercrime and the cybersecurity side of things. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, AI has something to do with it. In terms of traditional underwriting, we still want our underwriters to go through submissions that brokers submit and really see what core controls are in place for the potential insureds that we would offer policies to. AI is also a feature that we have here at Converge. It helps underwriters' life's a little bit easier in terms of submission comes in, artificial intelligence can scan the app and help the clearance process to get the account cleared so we can review the account more quickly and efficiently within our platform. Also, AI can be used to do scans of the insured to see what potential other underlying issues may lie that the application doesn't tell us. And those scans are used to really help the insured. It's always about learning and how they can better increase their cybersecurity posture.
One of the things that we discussed in the sort of conversation we had earlier was the sort of broader state of the cyber insurance industry. It's, the 30,000 foot view. It's an incredibly, relative to the rest of the insurance business, new product. Where do you think the market stands with regard to its size now and what's coming in the future? There's no shortage of reports about the threats that companies face. Give me a sort of big picture view of the industry as you see it.
I mean, cybersecurity landscape is constantly evolving. There has been increase in sophisticated threats like ransomware and phishing, which then demands to really safeguard individuals and organizations. And those sophisticated threats we're finding now more AI related. And artificial intelligence to me is a double-edged sword, meaning on one hand, if organizations can harness AI properly, they can usually detect, prevent, and predict cyber attacks in the future, and ultimately increasing their cybersecurity posture. On the other hand, you have AI being used by cyber criminals more and more now, and they are more effective, leading to higher payouts. So, and then what type of AI they're using is we see AI-driven phishing attacks and deep fakes. And actually, funny enough, today I was watching Squawk Box, and they had an individual on today talking about AI and how they're using more and more deep fakes. And growing up, I was always told not to share my social security number, right? Identity theft. But now what we're really starting to see is we're a culture of sharing, meaning that we are constantly posting on social media, either pictures of ourselves, our family, or videos. So they have our voice or our mannerisms, and they've taken that information and creating deepfakes of that. It's much harder to really realize what's legit or not.
Yeah, I mean, you touch on the risk that this creates, and one of the things that I'd like to hear about is the difficulty, given the pace of evolution, the sort of relative to other forms of insurance like homeowner, the sort of limited data about the threat and the fact that the threat's changing, that changes the underwriting process for you and other companies writing cyber insurance policies. How is it different from other forms of insurance in that respect?
Well, cyber, like I said, is constantly evolving. We're still in our infancy stage compared to other lines of business. So we don't have a lot of historical data. So that means cyber threats are unpredictable. So in the last 15, 20 years, the cyber policy has changed. It is broader now. It takes on other risks that potentially they wouldn't have thought to put into a policy 15, 20 years ago. crime is now thrown in there as well. It's just one example. So as the space continues to evolve and we see more losses come in, underwriters have to change their approach on underwriting. And that could be terms of what type of questions are on the application, what scans provide to follow up with brokers to ask questions to their insureds, and also constantly educating underwriters. That means here at Converge, we talk to our claims team on a regular basis to see what trends are out there in terms of claims that are reporting. We talk to our product team, who then in turn talks to our claims team, because we want to make sure what we see coming in the door, is that the type of coverage we want to provide, or do we need to start to provide certain coverages? And then we take that information, educate our brokers, let them know what we're currently seeing in the marketplace, and then they can pass that along to potential insureds as well.
So putting on my small business owner or medium-sized business owner hat, this isn't like getting a policy for fire or theft or things that may be a normal part of your business insurance. If I'm coming to you, or I'm coming to your brokers more specifically, what are the sorts of things that I should expect that are going to be unlike my prior experiences in insurance? And then also, what are some questions to ask? What are the things that you should be looking for in a policy that, help decide whether or not it actually covers you from the risks that you think exist now? And then how often, I know you typically renew a policy for certain things every year, but if you suddenly see a new threat evolve and it's specific to, say, your industry, is there a sort of way to, check in with the brokers and that kind of thing? And how would you, what guidance would you give a small or medium-sized business owner in that respect?
No, great question. Frankly, cyber is a business exposure, not just a security exposure. So the conversations should start at the board level or the equivalent of, depending on the size of the organization. And if you happen to have a chief information security officer, they should also be involved in the conversations with the brokers. I'm sorry, with the board at that level. They would truly understand the business best and what potential exposures they have. That is their job. And we see this more and more now that organizations are hiring CISOs and bringing them into the board levels to have that conversation, because they do understand the true risk and the true exposure that the company has. And that's a good starting point. From there, then the CISO or the equivalent of can reach out to a broker and start to explain what type of cyber coverage they're looking for or the exposure of their business to make sure they get proper placement. Because an insurance policy really is just financial protection, not just against ransomware either. There's also other elements to it that we've seen the evolution of the cyber policy as well, in terms of covering expenses, which can be forensic expenses. It could be notification costs, legal fees, regulatory fines, and penalties. And I know you touched on if other threats come up during the course of a policy period and they want to get better training on it, or what is their threat tolerance at this point. Cyber policies also they offer specialty services too. Incident response team, cyber consulting is one. They can do tabletops or phishing exercises. So that's kind of talking about the evolution of the cyber policy in the last 5, 10, 15 years, that there are more add-ons to the form that insureds can use, but really starting that conversation at the board level and then bringing it to the broker and finding the right type of coverage for that.
So you touch on something there that sort of gets into the next topic I want to touch on. One of the things that I had a conversation last week with a man who runs a cybersecurity firm, and we talked about how there's this teenage mentality among particularly a lot of smaller and medium-sized businesses that oh, it won't happen to me. And the truth of the matter is, it's an inevitability, right? This crime is too easy to commit, and the criminals aren't hackers with sophisticated computer knowledge. They're just people who want to to gain by stealing, to put it very, very simply. When you look at that integration, the need to sort of educate and communicate those realities to customers, to make them insurable, to make sure that you protect yourself from them being the victim of, say, a ransomware attack or some other attack. That integration of security and the insurance is the training you touched on. How important is that? Because again, I think one of the things in the human nature element of this, we've got a new cost. You're a small business, maybe your margins aren't great, but the cost of, say, a 2 or 3 week business interruption because of an email compromise or an invoice issue or whatever it might be could be catastrophic. And I think that there's this sort of human psychology part of it where you're adding a whole new responsibility, a whole new cost that, people need to eh, they need it, right? I mean, that's the situation. When you look at some of the crime stats, I mean, I think in 2023 there were 800,000 cyber crimes reported to the FBI. Globally, it's trillions and trillions of dollars lost to cybercrime. They're large, they're small, and a lot of the small businesses I've talked to think, oh, well, why would anyone want my data? Well, they don't care about your data. And then to your point about AI, I was chatting with someone the other day about how they can learn what your coverage might be by maybe hacking your insurance company and seeing, oh, they've got $1 million worth of coverage. We'll ask for $1 million when we ransomware their data. So that relationship that exists, that is maybe unlike other forms of insurance, it, it's something that for the small business owner creates leverage, right? They can ask, listen, I need this insurance, but I also need help becoming safe from the sort of dangers. Is that sort of the landscape that exists now for a lot of potential customers or customers out there?
That does exist, yes. I mean, because no one's immune to a cyber attack, right? It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And obviously, they are doing risk transfer by purchasing cyber insurance. And they know that when they have that, they can feel secure if a threat were to occur. And yes, there could be incidents where a threat actor gains access and knows your policy limits. All these things are possible when you get to the bottom of it. But ultimately, organizations should rely on a cyber policy because it's there really because without a cyber policy, and if the cyber threat occurs, that organization may not exist anymore, right? So part of the cyber policy, amongst other things that I've talked about prior, is it helps the insured get back on their feet. And then all these other specialty services that they offer, because at the end of the day, it's how can we make the insured cybersecurity posture better, and really what can the carrier do for the insured. We constantly want to make them better, and that's why these services are offered. We're constantly evolving because the cyber threats are not going anywhere, and they're only getting more advanced.
Do you One of the things that we touched on when we spoke earlier before the podcast was the sort of emerging element of the, like, I don't know, is it a bespoke part of cyber insurance generally, which is sort of personal cyber insurance? And I just did a piece for the website on a Deloitte study about family business cybersecurity. I did one on a company out of, I think it's in Georgia, that is involved in sort of high net worth people. To touch on your point about how much we share, celebrities and people who live in the public eye, whether they're athletes or actors or even just business people, that public persona, they need to be branded via social media, creates a real vulnerability. Do you see that as something that will be something? Because I was surprised by the Family Business Report. A huge number of them didn't have cyber insurance at all. And I think, again, there's this idea that it's a new problem. It won't happen to me. I'm just curious what you think about that particular line of the cyber policy for individuals or a family, that sort of thing.
That type of insurance does exist. It's more of a niche space at this point, and it potentially could see growth in the future. Frankly, anyone that has a laptop, phone, tablet, and stores sensitive information on there is vulnerable, right? You can be attacked by an individual or a group for different array of reasons. I know that me personally, I keep getting Easy Pass text messages that I'm past due on my bill. And if I don't pay soon, they're going to charge me an exorbitant fee. I know that that's a bogus email or text message and I shouldn't respond or click on it. But once you do, they can gain access to, your phone, your laptop, and potentially other pertinent information they have stored there. For that, I do think there could be a growing trend in this type of insurance, but it really comes down to educating one another on really what is something you should be clicking on or not. And I know I talked about this prior about starting at the board level, having a CISO involved, and a lot of that gets passed down, meaning that there is phishing exercises that go on throughout the year. And if an individual at that organization clicks on it, they'll have more training to help prevent that in the future. I'm surprised that there is not more training at this point to individuals, maybe even say at the school level, which may be far-fetched at this point, because growing up, I didn't have a computer in school or cell phone, right? I have a daughter now who's 1 year old. When she goes to school, she's probably going to have a laptop or a cell phone really early in life compared to when I did. But if you're able to use those things, you should also be trained on those things and really how to properly store information, changing passwords, and if it looks suspicious, don't click on it. I think there's still a lot of education that has to go on with that as well, besides just having individual cyber insurance.
You make a really, really good point, and it's something that I've been writing something about that I haven't published yet. But the idea that we have, you know, the learning curve through school that helps us. I mean, it's everything from silly stuff like look both ways when you cross the street, or the health classes that might exist involving things like stranger danger. So much of the online world and the conversation for children now is around old-fashioned dangers, which is not to say they're not dangerous, but things like predators and those sorts of things. But the wisdom to recognize and critically think about, again, is my easy pass actually overdue, and why are you texting me? That there is this conversation that exists that we need to make that or more organic given the nature of technology in our lives, and that we need to be more aware of it. Do you, when you get to the moving that part of the idea to companies, when a company comes to say your brokers and that sort of thing, what are there, several things they specifically should be asking for, and make sure that they're covered for, whether it be ransomware, or what are the issues with a company that has, say 10,000 credit cards on file for customers and that sort of thing, or companies that send 1,000 invoices via email every month for lawn care? What are the things that they want to make sure that they know about, so that when they're discussing their policy and making sure they're covered, they have coverage for it, but then also can, on the flip side, start to analyze their own cybersecurity posture, and what the payment processes are, and are people logging on from personal devices, that sort of thing. What should I be asking? I know we touched on this a little earlier, but I'd like to dive down a little more on the various specific things that come up.
Right. In terms of those examples that you just listed, a lot of those will be covered under standard cyber policy these days. Because there's some of the things I touched about earlier were the extra covered expenses that didn't exist maybe 15, 20 years in a cyber policy, like notification costs. So if your personal information is taken during a breach, a cyber policy will be triggered to pay on behalf of notification costs. That's kind of goes for the same way for PCI information, that's credit card information as well. So those things do exist, but further that to continuous training is all of the specialty services I talked about that cyber insurance policies have today that possibly didn't exist 15, 20 years ago, because there are more vendors in the market now, and carriers are utilizing these vendors more and more often, where they're either included in the policy or the insurer can get them at a deep discount to constantly, we want the insured to constantly be learning and training their employees. So, like I said before, cyber consultant is an example, incident response team is an example, phishing training, which I've mentioned before. All these things, it's really a lot of losses or threats are affected because it's human error. Like we're clicking on things we shouldn't be, or we're not putting the proper protocols in place for multi-factor authentication and passwords and whatnot. A lot of this could be avoided if training is really put in place and kind of use common sense.
For the first time the other day, I was chatting with someone, and they said that they work with a company and they provide cybersecurity training and other products in that space. And this company's policy is sort of a 3 strikes and you're out. If you make a mistake, you will be then subjected to more training, and if you make a third mistake, it starts to affect you financially. So they do things like reduce your bonus, which I had never heard before. The idea of trying to find a way to make it clear that you can't use the same password and the same user for everything, and public Wi-Fi and all these things you hear about. One of the things that we chatted about earlier is the disconnect that exists, that maybe because it's sort of invisible to us, unlike a bank robbery or a crime scene, that people don't quite appreciate how widespread and significant the financial side of this crime is on a global scale. And I in preparation for this, I went online and I looked up some stats, and a lot of them are from 23, so the numbers will have gone up. But it's 10.5 trillion globally in 2025 is the projection of how much cybercrime costs. That's up from 3 trillion a few years ago. So to your point about the evolving threat and the evolving danger, 20 globally a cybercrime every 39 seconds. Here's the one. Back to data. I 60 to 70% of cybercrime is unreported. And there was a piece out of Britain the other day about banks, British banks, underreporting cyber attacks, which obviously makes the underwriting process hard. So when it comes to sort of I know there are a lot of new regulations coming on in the EU, and we have a sort of hodgepodge state to state in America. Do you think there's a need for some sort of more collective sort of data set that allows underwriting to be more efficient so that the risk can be better analyzed? And do you think that's the kind of thing that is on the horizon with, and again, like maybe it's a federal cybercrime reporting that's not just HIPAA and the SEC, that sort of thing? Do you think that'd be useful to the industry to help it grow and be more financially secure so that the risks were more secure?
Good question. So government has stepped in before in other lines of insurance. What comes to mind is flood insurance off the top of my head. And there could be a potential for the government to step in regarding cyber. And the reason I say that, it's evolving. There's been an increase in sophisticated ransomware or just cyber threats in general, which could then, have the government step in, be proactive to really safeguard national security, infrastructure, and just individual data as a whole. And if the government does step in, there could be a couple positives. One is cyber insurance can be readily available to the masses. There could be regulations put in place that the government would make companies adhere to. So they have to follow proper protocols and securing information depending on industry classes and what they're doing. And the government can roll out education and training to the masses as well. So again, maybe that becomes something we talked about earlier where it's in your school system, you're learning about it earlier on in life. But there's also potentially some drawbacks to that, right? Moral hazard comes to mind. The reason I say that is if the government is going to back cyber losses or offer cyber insurance, do individuals or organizations get complacent and take on more risk knowing that the government's their backstop? And if that happens, I would imagine that cyber criminals will be aware of this as well. And you'll see even more of an increase in cyber threats in the marketplace. And we have been seeing that the cost has significantly gone up year over year. Just your stats alone that you mentioned shown that. That's proof. Is the government really going to take on that type of cost? And if not, does it get passed down to the taxpayers? So I think there's some good and bad. Potentially there's how this would work out. I think there's a lot to really flush out if that were to be the case, but there are some positives and right now I think some negatives as well if that did happen, depending how it plays out.
So one of the things that we chat on the phone, and I was trying to find a way to sort of make this a simple analogy, because a lot of what we try to do is sort of, make this kind of new thing accessible, particularly to small and medium-sized businesses. And I just want to sort of step aside now. Explain to me what an underwriter does.
The easiest way to, I guess, explain it is an underwriter will assess the security posture of an insured. And how they do that, I know I mentioned this earlier, the easiest way to do that is by reviewing an application that a broker submits. And on that application, there's a list of questions that are asked. And from that, the underwriter can get a good idea what core controls are in place or what core controls are missing. And if they want to move forward with offering terms, prior to that, the underwriter can have a conversation with the broker, say, hey, we're missing these questions or core controls. Can you follow with the insured? Or we can go forward and offer terms and what we call subjectivities, ask those questions as subjectivities prior to bind. That is what underwriters do at a very high level: review applications, offer terms. And I also mentioned this before, underwriting is constantly evolving. So we're talking to our claims team, we're talking to our product team, we're talking to risk engineers that are also internal to learn what's going out in the marketplace, some things that we may be missing and other questions we need to ask based on industry. So it's constantly evolving, and that's really what underwriter does at a very high level. It's just reviewing, assessing risk, and then offering potentially a policy to the insured.
You touched on something there that I know we've kind of skimmed over and talked about a tiny bit, but the level of communication that is needed in this because of the dynamic nature of cyber insurance and the cyber risks that people face, that's something that I feel like I want to pause and make sure anyone who's listening to this, who's shopping for cyber insurance, keeps in mind the idea that they might hear back and say, well, you don't have this, so your risk is a little higher. The idea that there is a, if you will, a negotiation. And the simplest example I can think of is that I get a discount on my homeowner's insurance because I have a home alarm. And it's, that idea that there is a way to sort of make yourself safer, which is the idea. I mean, one of the weird things about insurance is we don't ever want to actually need it, but you sure want to have it if you do. And I think that that's where in cyber there is this sort of reminder, I think, for companies that are maybe needing to enhance their policy, or they've had a breach and they're like, oh man, we weren't protected properly. That's maybe not like other insurance. Is that a fair way to put it, or is that sort of, would you encourage someone who's shopping for it to, I don't want to use the word interrogate because it sounds a little aggressive, but the idea that they can really sort of ask a lot of questions and sort of expect some explanation about why this matters and why that matters, and how those things could lower the cost of their policy and also make them less likely to need to actually file a claim should something happen. Is that a piece of advice you think is worth passing on to people?
And how we underwrite and what I teach underwriters at Converge is, even if there may be controls missing within the application, I think it's best that we always bring that to the forefront, let the broker know, and also offer suggestions to put in place. Because at the end of the day, we want to make the insured as strong as possible with their cybersecurity posture. And there's multiple ways to do that, right? We can point out some deficiencies and what they can do to remediate that. We can point them in the direction of vendors that can help them as well. We also have scans that we can give the insured and where they can start to work on that as well. So the goal is obviously to get cyber insurance. Even if you sign up for it and you get the policy, it doesn't stop there. It continues to grow. Even if there is lacking controls, the goal is to work with the insured to get them at the top levels possible, so they feel secure in their controls as an organization, and that you build that rapport with the insured as well, because you're here to help.
One of the things you touched on education, and when we spoke, we talked about the 0-day Netflix series. We talked about sort of a public backstop and the government private sector sort of backstop that might exist in sort of some sort of catastrophic cyber event that's on the scale of what we might associate with the damage done to our society by, say, a terrorist attack like 9/11. Do you think that, given how common these crimes are and the risk that exists for small, medium, large businesses, which we hear about, and but the big story from last year, it seems to me, is the CrowdStrike outage, which was a tech glitch. It wasn't actually a cyber crime. That there needs to be sort of a greater level, like a PSA about this sort of thing, to we talked about educating kids, to raise the awareness that there is a real threat to the operational side of your business and your life as a result that exists. Do you think that sort of education, sort of building off the part of we touched on just now about communication, do you think that's the sort of thing that would be useful to the industry to help help it grow at the rate it still is?
I do. I do think the communication has come a long way in the past 5, 10 plus years. We could look at universities. They offer more cyber tech degrees or cyber insurance degrees. That's an uptick as well. But I still think there's room to grow. The earlier on, like I said, educating kids, the school system earlier will help the communication go forward with the next generation. We've had Hollywood step in, like you mentioned, 0-day. I see categories on Jeopardy for cybersecurity. I think awareness is growing. It has seen a huge increase in awareness over the last 5 years. I think we're going in the right direction, but I still think there's a lot to be learned and to discuss. I think that more education, more training for organizations should be more readily available to really help reduce the overall cyber threats.
Well, I'm looking over my notes. I don't see a ton that we haven't touched on, but one of the things I like to do at the end of everything, or toward the end of everything, is there anything that you don't think we've touched on that you want to talk about, or anything you want us to know about Converge or about the underwriting process, or anything you want to have a think about and restate, as they say? So is there anything else? One of the things I've done on a few of these now is what's the most the craziest story you've heard in the cybersecurity, cyber insurance world? So is there anything that we haven't touched on or anything you'd like to add at this point before we wrap up?
The one thing I guess we could touch on is CDK. I know you briefly mentioned that, and I don't know if, if listeners have a full understanding of what happened or how far spread it is. So I could briefly discuss that because that was one of the most recent large events to occur in the last year. And for those that don't know, CDK is mostly a software company that deals in the auto industry world, and they had a breach. But what's crazy about it is it just didn't affect CDK. It affected 15,000 auto dealers. And these auto dealers rely heavily on their software, which means they couldn't lease cars, they couldn't buy cars. The service station was down. They couldn't register cars, and they couldn't talk to manufacturers to ship more cars if needed. A lot of them had to revert back to pay pad and pen to write down leases or any cars that were sold. It just goes to show you that cyber, when an attack does happen, and it depends what the organization is, it just doesn't stop at that organization. There is a downhill effect that can put a stop to an industry, and that was auto dealers for a couple weeks. It just goes to show you the importance of education, training, having cyber insurance. Because some of those auto dealers may not exist if they didn't have cyber coverage, because even though CDK was affected, they were also affected as well.
You make a great. I mean, we the we're both of the age where the promise of the internet was this amazing interconnectivity, and Steve Jobs talks about the frictionless environment of the iTunes store, and the beauty of that is that there's a lot of business done that wasn't done the same way, and that you can buy cars online and do things electronically without filling out paper and forms and that sort of thing. And I touched on the CDK event in a opinion piece I wrote about how that's an example of one attack shutting down an entire industry. And if you scale that, because that's what the internet is capable of doing, right? You scale that to maybe something like healthcare. You're talking about a situation where, in order to recover from that, to be resilient to that sort of attack, you need to have both the security in place and then the ability to fund the recovery, which is where the insurance comes in. Is that a fair way to put it?
Yes, it is. Cyber insurance there is obviously there to help you, when an attack happens and to build you back up as well, but also at the same time where you were deficient to put in the controls possible so that you're resilient the next time around. I think you said it perfectly, honestly.
Well, put a nick in the bedpost. Ryan, is there anything else we need to talk about? Anything else we think that people should know or is going on in this world that matters?
I mean, if you don't have cyber insurance, I suggest reach out to a broker to see what is out there for you, and if you do, see if there's any deficiencies in your form to make sure you're properly covered.
Yeah, I mean that one. One of the things I've encountered recently is a couple of anecdotes where companies had policies, and that they saw the blanket coverage for their cyber insurance policy was say $3 million, but their ransomware coverage was only 100 grand with a 10 grand deductible, and that's that'll go quickly if you're recovering from any kind of breach that requires you to do credit monitoring for customers and even the active notification, and then the public facing part of this, if you're a public facing company, that you need to do sort of crisis management and crisis communications and remediation of sort of the publicity issue with it, and that all gets very expensive very, very quickly. So that idea that you want to make sort of you do your insurance policy every year, but maybe cyber is something you should keep the pulse of with a little more regularity, is something that a number of people have said to me. I mean, is that the idea that we want to it's a burden, but it's less of a burden than not doing it and getting done by some sort of cyber breach that you could have avoided or had greater protection against.
Right. Just follow the news. They talk about the most recent threats or breaches that happen. If it's in your industry class, then it's something you should be bringing up with your broker representative to see, hey, am I covered in this event occurs to me? Do I have enough coverage in place or limit? So I think these are questions they should always be asking. Your broker is there to help you. And then they can reach out to the insurance carrier and make sure that the proper coverage is in place.
Well said. Well said. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. Ryan Mimmo with Converge Insurance, head of underwriting. Thank you so much for the time. To everyone who watched, leave a comment, have a share. We'd love to know what you think. And if you've got any questions, please drop them in the comments, and we'll do our best to answer them. And that's it for now. I'm Martin Hinton, editor of cyber insurance news and information. Thank you very much for watching.